The main thing that drives a memory problem is the same thing that's causing the seizure disorder. So I look before the seizures in a sense. What is causing someone to have seizures? Because that's really a symptom of an abnormality in the brain. And that basic abnormality or pathology is probably also the root of a memory problem.
Welcome to Epilepsy Sparks Insights. I'm your host, Tori Robinson, and today I am joined by clinical neuropsychologist Dr. Laurie Miller from Memo Rehab, a digital memory training program. Laurie is going to be sharing why memory problems in the epilepsies are often far more complex than people realise. Indeed, memory problems are actually one of the most common and frustrating experiences reported by people with an epilepsy. But what are they caused by? Is it seizures, mood, medication, surgery, sleep disruption, or the underlying brain pathology itself? Laurie is going to share with us the different types of memory, how memory functions are accessed, and the evidence behind practical memory rehabilitation strategies that may help improve everyday functioning and quality of life. If you're new here, please subscribe so that you don't miss future conversations. And let's get into today's episode.
There are so many types of memory, and we tend to divide them up. As neuropsychologists, we think of them in different boxes, probably because different parts of the brain are responsible for different types of memory. So let me describe some of the main types. One is motor or procedural memory. It's the way that you learn to walk or play the piano or even formulate speech by learning to, modulate your tongue and your lips and everything.
Yeah.
So it's very important kind of learning for children. And it's basically the job of the cerebellum, which is the part of the brain at the back, and underneath it's a little tennis ball that sits under the main part of the brain. Well, that's for the early motor learning. Later, we have retrograde memory. It's a component where it's memory for the past, basically. So if you have something happen to your brain, like you have a sudden head injury or you have a stroke, retrograde memory counts everything that has come before that time. So your ability to think about your past. And even that can be divided into autobiographical memory versus semantic memory. So semantic memory is knowledge of the world, your vocabulary, your knowledge of the state capitals, things like that you've learned that's a bit separate from your autobiographical memory. Then there's anterograde memory. So everything that has come after maybe that onset of a head injury. Anterograde memory means you're putting something into the brain and you're seeing how well the person can remember it later on. So it's kind of going forward. That can be divided by modality, and we might talk more about that. And then finally, the last one I would mention is prospective memory. That's when you're given something or you want to remember something in the future. So you have to recall it down the line.
So we need to make it more complex, I guess. What you've just said reminds me of people can have different issues with memory depending upon what part of their brain they injure or what part of the brain they have resected, for instance. It really depends, doesn't it?
It surely does. And that's really one of the big roles of a neuropsychologist in an epilepsy center, is to try and assess various types of memory in the context of other skills to see what part of the brain is not working quite as well as the other parts. And that's often where the seizures start.
So from a neuropsych perspective then, what are the main drivers of memory problems in people with an epilepsy? Is it the seizures? Because some people think, it's just the seizures that does that. Or is it the medication? Is it the whole disruption created by the seizures and other functions? Or is it something completely different?
My opinion is that the main thing that drives a memory problem is the same thing that's causing the seizure disorder. So I look before the seizures in a sense. What is causing someone to have seizures? Because that's really a symptom of an abnormality in the brain. And that basic abnormality or pathology is probably also the root of a memory problem. Often there might be hippocampal sclerosis, so a bit of pathology in the hippocampus that's going to lead to a seizure disorder. It also affects that really important structure in the brain for storing new memories. Again, as you said, if you have a stroke or you have a head injury, clearly there's a pathology established that may lead to seizures. It's also likely the cause of the memory disorder. There can be additional effects. You mentioned surgery. So yes, surgery can cause some additional problems depending on what is removed and the condition of the person's function before the surgery. So if their verbal memory was strikingly good and it was very strong skill for them and they're right-handed and then they have part of their left temporal lobe and part of the hippocampus removed, they will likely notice a drop in their verbal memory because that's the part of the brain that's really important for that.
Medications can also cause other symptoms such as sleepiness, which then can affect cognition and word finding as well. So it's not always the direct effect of some of these things.
I think over the lifespan, there's evidence that it causes cognitive decline if people go on having seizures quite regularly. If you have a seizure or significant discharges between the time of an event or an encoding, like when you learn the material and when you're trying to recall it. If you have a seizure in the middle, that's very likely to affect your memory. And if you have discharges in your hippocampus, even if you don't have seizures, you can have trouble later on. That is linked with longer-term memory problems. So it's really important to try to control those discharges and seizures.
So when you assess memory in people, what does that involve? So you're not saying, oh, by the way, can you remember, I don't know, where you went shopping this morning? What does it involve?
And You'd be surprised. Sometimes we do.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So, but what do you usually do? And maybe that's not, do you have a sort of a standard set of questions, and how do you identify what, regular people, say a friend, family might miss?
The job of a neuropsychologist is to assess memory, but also assess a variety of cognitive functions in a standard fashion. As in, we have a quiet environment, we're one-on-one, the conditions are optimal for storage of memory, right? Like we're really focused, and it usually takes a couple of hours. So there's usually some breaks, but we're not just assessing memory. We want to know how good is the person's attention? What is their problem solving like? Are they okay at flexible thinking? Because we want to see how the memory fits into the rest of the picture. But with regard to assessing memory, there are standardized measures where you give them in a certain fashion and then ask for the recall or the recognition later. One test would be to tell you a story and see how much you remember immediately, and then later ask you for that story again. And more recently, we are starting to do really long-term memory, so it might call you up out of the blue a week later and say, what do you remember that story? Because what we found was that we were missing some memory deficits in people. Sometimes people performed quite well at half an hour later, and yet we're still complaining there's something wrong with my memory. Well, you call them a week later and they can't even remember their appointment. So there was something changing over a longer period of time. So we would tell stories. We would get you not just any stories; they are specific stories. And there's ways of scoring them for the details. There are lists of words we would give you and get your recall. Sometimes you get some repetition. You might hear the word list several times and try to learn it and then recall it later. And there are pictures that we would show you, get you to copy them, see how much you can recall of those. And that's sort of the pictures versus the words is sort of testing the right side of the brain versus the left. Sometimes we do prospective memory too. That's, again, a fairly recent addition, but it's important to give some tasks to the person to try to recall during their assessment session and perhaps even recall during the next several days. So that's, sometimes prospective memory is introduced.
Do you think that we underestimate how treatable memory problems in epilepsy can actually be? Because I think sometimes we'll think, okay, you've got a memory problem because, for instance, temporal lobe resection, there's not a lot we can do. Good luck with that. Is that the case? And what's the biggest mismatch that you see between how people describe their memory problems and what your objective testing shows?
I would say along with your neurologist, get your seizures controlled as best you can. So, reduce the discharges, reduce the seizures, use the best medication and the level of medication that's adjusted, to keep you from being too sleepy. If you want to try to improve your memory, you got to keep your brain healthy, observe things like good eating, getting exercise, getting good sleep. Then you have to change your lifestyle. If your memory is not very good, you might need to become more organized. You might need to set up better routines for yourself. And thirdly, you can also try to learn some memory strategies. So encoding with more elaboration at the time that you're learning something new, preparing to learn, so getting your brain in a good state and thinking about planning on learning.
So what is memory rehabilitation? Is it what you've just described? Is that the same thing? Or what does it involve?
It's largely that. A neuropsychologist would normally give you feedback at the end of your assessment to give you a few strategies, few points that might help your memory. I used to like to send a feedback letter so that, you didn't just hear it, but you had it in writing, because obviously if you have a memory problem.
Yeah.
Then I started to develop some more intensive memory training where people got instruction on why a strategy works, how you can apply it, and then get to practice it. So I think all those steps are really important in putting strategies into place. You can't just tell someone, oh, you should use visualization or you should use elaboration. How do you do that? So you need to sort of train them. That's what memory training is.
No, that's great. And what evidence do you have that what you do works?
We sort of have about 15 years worth of evidence where we ran group-based studies. We would have, say, 10 to 15 people come together for 6 weeks where they got 2 hours worth of training on these strategies, also improving their lifestyle and their nutritional levels. And we started to publish those in about 2011.
How do you measure how good somebody's doing, though?
Well, we would do outcome studies. So we would measure some things in a standard way, like we would look at anterograde and prospective memory, sometimes with our objective tests where we're, again, giving stories or giving items that they have to recall later. Or we're giving questionnaires about their everyday life. So again, there's standardized measures where either they or a carer or both fill in how well they remember things in everyday life, and then reassess after they've done the training.
What are things that can be done easily in everyday life and that you've seen evidence as to why they can be beneficial for improving one's memory?
Learning to use your phone well is a very good external aid. So it's really good for prospective memory, obviously. You put things in and you remember to keep your phone with you. And it's also... it's common. So it's not just people with epilepsy that are using their phones. So that's a really good external strategy. Keep a journal at night. If you're having trouble remembering life events, it's a good way to rehearse what's happened in the day. Just note a few key points, and then you'll have that, for years. You can look back. That's a really good way of rehearsing and recording. And then I would say, try to look at your organization and routine. Stick to routine, de-stress, declutter. Keep it simple.
Yeah, I would say that's for anybody and everybody, actually. Stress, we know, is something that really does impact memory negatively.
Yeah, it's the same kind of things that work for everyone. You can do specific strategies, which require a little more time to explain, but just spending more time when you are encoding someone's name. So repeating it, talking to them about their name. Often people complain they can't remember names, but if you spend a little more time with the person, asking them how to spell their name, those things can help you recall it later.
Go on, give us a little insight into what you just said.
Okay, so hi, Tori. That's an interesting name. Is it a nickname for Victoria?
It is, and no affiliation with any political party at all.
No, you weren't named after the Queen or anything?
No, although my friends do call me the Queen sometimes if I put on a posh voice, darling.
With that kind of rehearsal, I wouldn't forget your name. That's a number of touch points. I could maybe ask you how you spell it as well. And now we've repeated it a couple times in conversation. And I haven't even bothered to introduce myself to you. And that's something we tend to do in conversation, is like, as soon as I hear your name, I say, oh, my name's Laurie. Well, try not to do that. Try to wait. Try to talk about the other person's name a bit so that you have time to think about their name before you've changed the conversation to be talking about yourself. Do you know what I mean? So I can ask you about Tori, and is that short for Victoria? And were you named after the Queen? And how do you spell it? And then I can say, oh, well, my name's Laurie. Okay,
I get it. But what would you say? So say you're going to a networking event, right? Or something like that. You can't do that with everybody. It would be embarrassing apart from anything else. So in real life, what does one do?
Yes, you don't have to remember everyone's name. Nobody remembers everyone's name. So you don't have to use names. You can try to tell the person how you remember them. Oh, I've seen one of your podcasts. You can tell them that you know them, even if you can't remember their name in conversation. You can prepare for the event. If you know that some people are going to be there by name, you could rehearse those names ahead of time. Think about who you're going to meet, what you know about them. That sort of preparation rehearsal is good. Name tags.
Do you know what though? I get embarrassed when I'll go to an event and I'm just like, I feel like I'm looking at their chest and say, what is their actual name? Yeah. So I just think lots of these things are like great advice, but sometimes I think people, especially in the beginning, can be quite a bit embarrassed about doing it. It's something that you're not used to doing.
But that's why I think memory training courses can help, because you actually make it a practiced thing that you get used to doing it over and over, and then it becomes a little more normal.
So it is about practice, just like physical exercise. Is that generally what we're saying here?
I would say so. Yeah. Because you're never going to use a strategy unless it becomes like second nature to you.
So it's habit, really getting to the habit. Okay. So if somebody is listening, whether they be a clinician, a researcher, or somebody with an epilepsy, or a mum or a dad, and they want to improve their memory outcomes today, we've spoken about one thing, like looking at somebody's badge or asking them about their name, etc. But what are some general evidence-based strategies that they could use that would help them do this, both short and long term?
There's an awful lot of individual strategies that have been researched. Some of them make more sense in everyday life than others. So for example, if you have a grocery list of 5 items you have to remember, you will be better at remembering it if you can take those 5 items and put them in some kind of ridiculous image together, or if you can remember them in different parts of your house, like if you can imagine yourself walking around your house and you have to form a visual image, the broccoli is growing out of the stove top, or whatever. You have to make a kind of unusual image. That takes quite a bit of work. And what we do in our memory training courses is we can mention that strategy, but instead, like, making a list is obviously an easier kind of thing to do. So there are things that work in principle, but in everyday life, they're always better. There's, pick and choose amongst your strategies, which ones work the best. And making a simple list is going to probably be better in most cases, unless you don't have a pencil and paper and you have to remember something. Well, making an unusual visual image is a good thing to do. So, if I was trying to remember your name and you mentioned the political party, which makes me think of kind of rah, raving Tories, I might try to think of you doing something like that.
Oh, great. What a sight. A huge thank you to Laurie for sharing her expertise with us. Memory problems are so often a challenge in the day-to-day life of those with an epilepsy, so it's great to hear that there are practical, evidence-based strategies that can genuinely help people improve how they function day to day. If you found today's conversation helpful, please give the episode a like and subscribe for future episodes. And if there was a particular insight or strategy from today's discussion that stood out to you, feel free to share it in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.